The Kremlin is calling the latest round of Russia-USA talks on ending the war in Ukraine constructive. Constructive. If that was constructive, what would deadlock look like? If that was constructive, what would a charade with Vladimir Putin and his team stringing along President Trump and his team look like? Well, the answer is it would look exactly like this. Ukraine's leaders are offering to talk if Russia will talk to Ukraine. European leaders are trying hard to be in on the talking. All Ukraine's friends are hoping President Trump doesn't lose interest and walk away. And Russia's insisting they're ready to talk, and all the while waging war, hoping to wear down Ukraine's friends and making life for Ukrainians as close to hell as possible. And that the lives of Ukrainians living this war, feeling the pain of the Russian invasion, is what we maybe hear too little about. We hear little of resistance against the Russians in occupied Ukraine, but resistance there is. Fighters and saboteurs who risk a terrible retribution for their work against the occupying forces. Now, in a moment, I'll be talking to an academic who has been in regular contact with the Ukrainian resistance, studying their operations and their work against the Russian military. But now, though, as I promised, I can welcome to the programme Dr Jade McGlynn, who's from the War Studies Department at King's College London. Hello to you, Dr McGlynn.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So, look, we hear comparatively little or very little about a Ukrainian resistance movement, but there is one, Dr McGlynn, and it is definitely active.
Yes, it's quite remarkably active given the incredibly repressive environment of the occupied territories. The vast majority of resistance, by most measurements, around 90%, is sending coordinates, so-called human intelligence, to explain where this or that military base of the Russians may be located. But that's incredibly useful. Often we talk about the occupied territories as just these conquered lands to be forgotten, but of course they are just the other side of the front line. And there is an incredible amount of information that is sent both ways. There are, of course, also much more, I suppose, your standard explosive resistance activities. We've been tracking, my research assistant and I have been tracking different actions over a fortnightly basis. And in general, we have between 13 to 15 violent acts of resistance. That might be the assassination of FSB officers, Russian security service, counterintelligence. That might be blowing up railway lines that provide logistics for the military. But considering we're nearly 4 years in, it's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. And as you say, we don't hear a great deal about these operations. Are they impactful? Do the sabotage and killing of the enemy operations that are taking place, are they significantly hurting the Russian military?
I think the best example here is to give the best way to answer this question is to give a specific example. So everybody knows, or most people know, about Operation Spiderweb, which was the famous SQ operation where they sent in. The operation was only possible because of a man from Donetsk who went back into occupation. So he was living in free Ukraine, went back into occupation, took a Russian passport, lived quietly his life, setting up his lorry business, and then, of course, provided all of the lorries through which the drones were sent. So often, I think it's very dangerous, and it's far too dangerous to compile, full lists of all of the operations. Around probably about 20% of what the resistance get up to ever becomes in any form public. But they're consistently having an impact. They're consistently slowing the Russian advances. And bluntly, Ukraine needs all of the help it can get. And help from the other side behind the front lines is especially valuable.
Well, indeed. And so tell me, Jade, who are these resistance fighters? And when we think of a past example, the resistance against occupying forces, take, the forces that were occupied by, or the places occupied by the Germans in World War II. We had ordinary people who went into action, men and women, ordinary people, as I say, then becoming active partisans, taking enormous risks. Who are these resistance fighters?
They're actually very similar. So there were people who were deliberately left behind, trained by various services and militaries, and their job was to stay behind and to conduct resistance. And in most cases, and if we talk specifically about Mariupol, where most of my research focuses on occupied Mariupol, in most cases those people were either rounded up or in the best case managed to flee. Because it was too obvious. I mean, they all came from similar groups of very civically engaged Ukrainians. And so it didn't work. What happened afterwards, first of all, it was devastating, of course. But then what happened afterwards was ordinary citizens, and actually the main I suppose demographic is middle-aged women, housewives,
Really?
who are subordinate, according to the reports that people who work in this tell me. Yes.
God, remarkable. Middle-aged women taking on this kind of work. And from what we know about the occupying forces, the Russian military, the risk is absolutely remarkable, because we're talking about a brutal, in fact sadistic enemy occupying their land, and one easily imagines that any resistance fighter or gathering intelligence on the Russian military, if they were to be caught, the repercussions could be horrendous.
The repercussions would be, at the very least, being tortured in a basement. And I mean, the OHCHR and the UN have documented over 200 black sites, around 46 of which are just disused basements and garages where people are tortured and disappeared. There are currently 15,250 civilians from the occupied territories who have been disappeared into these black sites, into the Russian prison system. Not often, to be honest with you, for conducting resistance, but actually just for as little as reposting pro-Ukrainian content. So yes, the risks are very high. I would say that I think we also need to be more realistic about what drives these people, and it is the extreme brutality of the occupation. Yes. It's hatred that drives them, I think, rather than a commitment to certain abstract ideals, though that commitment may be there. It is a hatred and an anger at people coming to their land, deeming them to be foreigners in their own homes.
Yes.
Appearing people and acting with total impunity.
You are managing to keep in contact with some of these people and some of their, and keeping track, as it were, of some of their operations. There's a limit, I guess, of course, to what you can tell me about those contacts. But are you able to gauge the kind of people we're talking about here and their motivations from your contacts?
The main motivation, to be honest, and I would love to be able to paint it in more romantic pictures, the main motivation is just a deeply enraged sense of injustice and hatred towards the people who have come and who have disappeared their friends, have tortured their friends, who have bombed their homes, taken over their homes if they haven't bombed them, and have created a system where there's no medicine, there's no running water, where people can stop you on the street, search your telephone, and then take you off to some FSB cell. A system just that bluntly reminds us of the very darkest days of Europe's history. Yes,
and when it comes to gathering intelligence, I suppose, in the age of digital storage and communication, then there's an extra dimension to the business of gathering and passing on intelligence too.
Yes, there is, but it's interesting because wherever possible, it's safest to use non-digital methods, because the way that the Russian occupation system works is they have a particular operating mechanism, and it means that they can see all non-encrypted. So the Telegram app, which is not encrypted, is popular in Russia, and they can see all non-encrypted messages that are sent through digital systems that are connected to Russian mobile or internet networks. So they can see pretty much anything that isn't sent unencrypted. And there are a lot of people working on this. Just last week, President Putin signed a decree arguing for 95%, arguing for a target or setting a target of 95% Russian identity in the occupied territories by 2036. So it's a very ideological element. Although there is a huge amount of cruelty for cruelty's sake, there's also this incredible surveillance and tracking, because this is about destroying Ukrainian identity in the occupied territories and a very brutal form of Russification.
Yeah. So those of us sitting in the safety of offices, or in my case, a nice warm studio, the bravery of these people is mind-boggling.
It's completely mind-boggling, and I think that's where it is important as well to not place unrealistic expectations on them, to understand that often, if they can provide information that's helpful, great, but also to think about ways we can help them. We can't just ask things of these people. We have to make sure that there are mechanisms in place to evacuate them if there are risks to them, to try to get medicine to them. As I mentioned, the situation with medicine is horrific, to try in whatever small ways we can. And there are a lot of blocks. I won't pretend that's an easy job, but to do whatever can be done to say, you've not been forgotten. You still have support. We're very grateful. from Ukrainian and from those people like me who are obviously very pro-Ukrainian. And I think even this opportunity that you've given me tonight, John, just to keep them part of the conversation, that these people exist and they deserve to be part of the discussion.
Well, Dr Jade McGlynn of King's College London, so grateful for you for sharing your thoughts on these brave resistance fighters of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you.